Fortunately, I do think it's by design. And the worst part of it is the therapists that I thought were the people that were supposed to kind of help people learn how to be resilient and learn how to cope with their lives are actually reinforcing that mentality as opposed to helping people take responsibility of their own feelings and learn how to deal with and cope with adversity. I mean, obviously people are victims of things. People go through things.
Yeah.
It's not about discounting people's pain. It's just about learning how to be resilient and how to carry on and how to be a productive human so that you're not sort of stuck there. And the number one outcome of disparities is not race, but it's actually whether there's two parents in the home.
Yeah.
These are the things that I've now
Blasphemy.
There's so many people that are saying they need help or saying that they are claiming these labels. And I mean, not everyone has a label. Not everyone should have a label. And that's not what should make us interesting. And it's okay to, I guess, be boring if that's what it makes you, because I want to be interesting because I'm smart and I'm thriving. I don't want to be interesting because I'm having problems or I'm having fake glamorous problems. Really, a lot of times it's like that. I don't play that game. I don't care.
Why are you here? Are we gonna live life in fear, or are we gonna stand up and make sure we're heard? Are we gonna hide or live life by our word? With integrity we can be all that we can see in our mind's eye until we're finally free. We can become whatever we choose once we know the choice lies within me and you. Now's the time to wake up. No time for playing small. With a painful history and an uncertain future, now is the time to evolve.
Hello, and welcome to the Unapologetically Human podcast with Dan Boyman. This is a podcast about trying to understand ourselves, each other, and this crazy world that we're living in that seems to be getting crazier and crazier by the day, more challenging to understand, but try to understand it we must. Mustn't we? Today, I bring you my conversation with Pamela Garfield-Jaeger, also known as the Truthful therapist. Pamela is a licensed clinical social worker with an extensive background in doing all sorts of therapy, working with a wide variety of people. And she has become particularly known in recent years for being outspoken with what's going on in the US and the West more generally when it comes to gender ideology and the legislated demand to unquestioningly affirm a patient's identity, and with progressive politics more generally. So we talk about her history, her experience, what's going on with the issues in the counseling profession. We talk about how when it comes to a lot of the progressive politics that we're seeing in our societies today, it seems that a lot of people have good intentions, but we talk about where they go wrong and how it leads to bad and even counterproductive policies, in the spirit of the popular saying, the road to hell is paved with good intentions. Now, as I record the intro to this episode, today is March 9th of 2024. And I actually recorded this episode with Pamela back in the middle of May of 2023. So my turnaround time on getting these edited and published has been quite slow, to say the least, for a variety of reasons. But it is actually somewhat good timing, because it just so happens that Pamela actually is releasing a book in just a couple days on March 12th called A Practical Response to Gender Distress. So I've been following Pamela's work for a few years now at this point. And for anyone that knows me or follows me on social media, particularly on Instagram, or that have listened to other episodes of the podcast, you know that I've been quite outspoken myself about what I see going on with gender ideology and the narratives and the ideological falsehoods surrounding it, to put it nicely. To put it more frankly, many, if not most, of the claims that we see in the mainstream surrounding gender ideology and trans issues are outright lies that are completely unsupported by evidence. And there's a lot of evidence to prove that, including many countries around the world, some of the most progressive countries in Europe, doing systematic reviews on the evidence and finding that the evidence for many of the claims being pushed in the mainstream in places like the US and Canada, the evidence is either very poor or it's actually non-existent. And so many countries have pulled away from and are pushing back on many of the claims and the narratives and the treatment protocols that continue to be pushed by activists and which have captured many of the institutions, including the top medical institutions in places like the Canada and the States. So we talk a lot about that stuff. We talk about some recent trainings that Pamela's been to around the time that we recorded this conversation, and how these narratives were already crumbling at that time, and the pushback against them was mounting. This is actually interesting timing as well, because it just so happens that this past week, the investigative journalist Michael Schellenberger, who was involved in publishing the Twitter files, which showed that social media companies were working directly with Western intelligence agencies, particularly in the US, to censor all sorts of stuff being posted on social media these past few years that didn't go along with the official narratives. And that includes things in relation to gender and trans politics, as well as all sorts of stuff during the pandemic, most of which turned out to be true. And he's written extensively investigating what he calls the censorship industrial complex since then. This past week, Michael Schellenberger and his team have actually released something called the WPATH files. And WPATH is the World Professional Association for Transgender Health. And the internal documents that he received from one or more whistleblowers show more clear and damning evidence that the narratives surrounding trans issues and medicine have been largely steered by activists, and they are not medical, they are not scientific, and they are not backed by the evidence. And that many of the practitioners that have bought into and continue to lie and push these narratives actually know that they're being untruthful and that they're causing massive harm. So interesting timing, because that was just released recently as well. But Pamela and I talk all about this stuff. We talk about the activist claims about trans suicides versus the reality, and how many of the challenges that are being positioned as being unique to the trans community are in fact normal human challenges in most cases that many people go through, especially kids going through puberty, trying to find who they are and create themselves and try out new identities and create their identity, and that these challenges are fairly normal challenges in the development of becoming an adult. Like, one of the narratives that I've heard many times that you may have heard is that similar to being born gay or not having a totally straight sexual orientation, that trans people are just simply born like this and nobody chooses it, and nobody would choose this for any reason. I even have acquaintance of mine that I did a leadership program with years ago, who's a teacher, and she saw some of the things I was posting on social media several months ago, pushing back on some of these narratives and saying that I'm being hateful and I'm being a transphobic bigot, and no one would choose this. And this is the problem with ideology of any kind, and being stuck in a belief system that you don't actually try to challenge and just try to shut down any information or any perspectives or evidence that doesn't go along with what you already believe, because it really just shows that people don't see their blind spots and they don't know what they don't know. Because as Pamela and I discuss, there are many reasons, there are many motivations that may be and are influencing people, especially young people, and especially young women going through puberty, to adopt a trans identity versus these simplistic black and white narratives and slogans that are being pushed around this issue. And we talk about how much of this is actually by design, because as often happens, especially with medical scandals, just like the opioid crisis, there are multi-billion-dollar business interests at the heart of what we're seeing surrounding trans issues and the medicalization of people, because the companies that create and sell these drugs, these hormones, and the people who perform these extremely expensive so-called gender-affirming surgeries, those people and those companies and those industries have a vested interest for these narratives to be simplified and to be made black and white, and to have the conversation shut down, and to ignore all of the mountains of evidence against the claims that they're making. And they have extremely deep pockets in order to donate to the largely activist driven organizations that are doing their bidding to push these narratives. And many, if not most of these people, I think, as we said, the road to hell is paved with good intentions. They're not consciously doing the bidding of big pharma. They have genuinely bought in to a belief system and an ideology surrounding these issues that have become so extremely politicized and tribalized. And there's even become this social clout in the reinforcement of these victim ideologies that so many people are unable or unwilling to look into or be honest about the actual evidence when it comes to these issues. So we talk about all that and more. Pamela's got a new book coming out March 12th. There's lots of links to other conversations that we talk about in relation to this issue, a bunch of documentaries, the WPATH files. It's all there. And it's not hard to find for anybody who actually wants to understand what's going on with this and other issues that we discuss. So, without further ado, I give you my conversation with the Truthful therapist, Pamela Garfield-Jaeger. And if you'd like to support the show, please give a rating and or a review on your favorite podcasting app. It really helps others find the show. All right, let's go. Cool. Well, thank you so much for joining me on the Unapologetically Human podcast. And I like to say that this podcast, why I created it and sort of just who I am, is really about just trying to understand ourselves, understand other people, and understand the modern world that we're living in, which is, even before the last few years, just the sheer speed of the changes that we're dealing with in the modern world, I think it's too much for us, right? It's too much, it's too fast, and it's, a lot of the issues that we're having can actually be kind of chalked up to that. Like I think we're really having a hard time as humans just adapting to the speed of change in the modern world. And it's like the modern world already, with all of these changes, was already crazy before all the increases in insanity we've seen over the last few years have been because of the pandemic and all the conflict that's been happening. And then it seems like the issues that happened with like George Floyd and the protests and the racial uprising and the massive expansion of like the DEI bureaucracy, and then sort of what's happening with gender has kind of been stacked on top of all of that. So there's just so much to go into. And yeah, I really appreciate what you've been doing with your work and everything that you've been sharing. So maybe we can start out. I know you've explained you're doing a lot of podcasts and stuff, right?
Yeah, I've been pretty busy lately. I think
Yeah.
I'm going to take a little break after this one because I've been doing
Yeah.
so many interviews lately,
Yeah. Well, no,
but it's good.
I think it's because you see the importance of really these conversations need to be had. And if you're in a position, um, with your knowledge and your experience to kind of speak to a lot of this stuff, then of course, you have that motivation to do so, right?
Yeah.
But yeah, no, I've seen you on a bunch of podcasts. I know you're busy, so that just makes me that much more grateful that you've agreed to come and have a chat with me today. And yeah, so I know you've explained your kind of background and your story kind of probably a lot of times, but maybe we can start out, just give a little bit of a background, yourself personally, your education, and um, kind of what I recall you saying like you were kind of away from the profession due to some health issues for a time, and when you came back it was almost like you had just seen this massive change. So maybe speak to some of that a little bit, and then plenty of questions I have, but also I just want to kind of set the tone as well, that I want you to just be able to kind of talk about whatever you want to talk about. And maybe, if some things people haven't been asking you on some of these other conversations you've been having, if there's anything that comes up, then we can kind of go in that direction as well.
So yeah, my background and experience. So I'm a licensed clinical social worker. I actually got my degree in New York City at New York University. I actually have a dual degree in social work and public administration, but I don't use the public administration side, but I did like a
Mm.
dual track back then. I worked a lot in schools. I worked in nonprofits. I worked in hospital settings, both in New York City, and I've since moved to California. I actually moved to California in 2003 after I actually witnessed and had a rough time dealing with the aftermath of 9/11 in New York City. That's quite a
Hmm.
while ago, just to date myself a little bit here.
Yeah, I'm much older than I look. I remember 9/11 as well. I feel like, as long as you weren't super young, we all remember that day.
Yeah, so I was out there on the streets in New York, and I was a young social worker, and a lot of these agencies got money for 9/11. So I was kind of shuffled around to a lot of families to help them deal with the grief and aftermath of
Mm.
that. And then the subways weren't working right. And I think I also, well, personal reasons, I decided I wanted to move across the country. So I moved to California. I actually was a bartender for a little while, which is a fun little blip in my history. And then I got back to work in like foster care or group home settings. Really, my focus ended up being a lot with teens and with families. And as my career grew, I became a clinical supervisor. And I was supervisor starting in 2011. So, it's been a while. And
Yeah.
I was working in school-based programs. So here in California, the way they do it is they contract out with nonprofit agencies to do the school-based counseling. So I was a school counselor, but I wasn't working for the districts. I was working for different nonprofit agencies. Like I actually worked for the
Hmm.
YMCA, and then I worked for two other local nonprofits here. I live in the Bay Area of California as the clinical supervisor. And then I kind of left the school thing when I was in the middle of a suicide cluster in Palo Alto, California. And
Mm.
soon after that, I got a job at UCSF, which was like the best paying, finally, good benefits, good salary, the whole thing. I was honestly even overqualified for it because it wasn't a supervisor position, but it was good
Yeah.
pay. I got this job at UCSF, and then that's when I came down with the health issues. So
Yeah.
they basically gave me a bad ergonomic situation, and I fell victim to like a nerve injury.
Oh no.
And yeah, it turned out I thought it was carpal tunnel at first, then we thought it was a neck injury, then it was just a big mystery. Doctors didn't believe me. I just went through this entire odyssey.
Hmm.
It turns out I had this rare condition called thoracic outlet syndrome, which it sounds fancy. It really means that like right here at my shoulder, my collarbone and my front rib were sort of crushing the nerves and blood vessels and things that go through into your arm, and then it creates all
Yeah.
kinds of all kinds of systemic issues in your neck and your back and headaches. And I was quite disabled, really
Yeah.
disabled, quite
Yeah.
frankly, and nobody knew what was going on. So that gave me a healthy mistrust of the healthcare system because people didn't believe me. And
Yeah.
it took a couple years to figure out what was going on. And I did actually, I'm very grateful. I found like one of under 10 surgeons in the entire world that can do the surgery that I had, which involved removing my top rib.
Wow.
Yeah. In fact, you're in Canada, people from Canada they're dying to get to the United States to be able to get to the surgeon I had, or one of very few that can perform this surgery
Yeah.
safely, because it's a high risk surgery. So they have to go in through your armpit and here. I mean, basically, if they don't do it properly, you're rendered completely disabled and in serious pain, because that's where all your nerves are, in your brachial plexus, it's called.
Yeah.
So
Wow.
I went through all of that, right? And so I clearly wasn't involved in what was going on in the world, politically
Yeah,
or
for sure.
culturally. I was really in the midst of that, and it was quite difficult. And those were the years I'm in California. Those were the years that like Trump was in power, and people were
Mhm.
really getting more divided here, and getting, I think, just more. I just bought into some of this woke ideology, things like that. I really wasn't involved in any of that. I was not paying attention. I didn't know or care much about that, because I was really just like trying to get through my day to day, hour to hour, because I
Yeah.
was in serious pain.
Mhm.
And yeah, so I got through all of that. Finally got better in 2020, quite frankly. And we all know what happened in 2020. There was lockdowns and whatnot.
Yeah.
Um, and then I finally got back to work, just part-time per diem, because I still actually have chronic pain, which is the reason why I'm able to be so outspoken. I have a lot less to lose than most people.
Yeah.
So I can't work a regular full-time job physically.
Mhm.
So that's why I'm able to do what I'm doing right now. So I finally got back to work part-time per diem, and that's where I saw just how crazy things were, how different things were since I left, which was about 3.5 years before.
Yeah, which isn't even that long really when
Yeah,
you think about it, but just really like noticeable changes, right?
very noticeable. I mean, it was there before, but just not to the same level.
Mhm.
I think it was starting right maybe when I left. And yeah, so I was working in a teen and adult program. It's called IOP and PHP, which is basically group therapy programs for people who have mental health issues, usually have been in the hospital for some, like a suicide attempt or some other mental health problem, and they're
Mhm.
there to kind of restabilize. They do like dialectical behavioral therapy or cognitive behavioral therapy, and it's a lot of just sort of just restabilizing back to, you know, back to regular life, helping them
Mhm.
making sure that they have a proper therapist and they have what they need to carry on. So I was doing that, and I was just filling in as a per diem. So I wasn't doing individual counseling. I was just doing group counseling. And so
Mhm.
I wasn't carrying a caseload to be able to talk to people one on one. But I was running the groups, and they put me in with the teens mostly because, one, that's where they needed the most people, and two, that's where my strengths were. I really was good with the kids, and
Yeah.
most people don't like working with the kids because some people might say they're a pain in the ass.
Some people, probably a lot of people.
But I enjoyed it. I liked it, and I was good at it, and I was able to reach them. And it's also, the hours were different because it's after school. People didn't like the later hours, but I was happy. I
Yeah.
was just so happy to work. I was so happy to be back in the field. I mean, it was really important to me. I remember like crying happy tears with my new supervisor. We had like this
Yeah.
really lovely moment that I was there, and how it meant, because I thought I was going to be disabled for the rest of my life, and here I was back at work.
Yeah, that's amazing. Like, I'm
But I
glad
could
to hear.
that was nice, but this is the problem. Unfortunately, because I live in California and I was a healthcare worker, my governor, Gavin Newsom, decided that
Right.
I was required to get a certain thing to continue working. I don't know if this is going to be on YouTube. I try not to say it and get
It's
doxxed.
no, it'll be just audio. So you
Okay.
can say whatever you want. I'm not
All
worried
right.
about Yeah,
Okay,
like
so there was the vaccine, the COVID vaccine mandates, and
right.
after everything I went through with my health issues, and I still continue to have chronic pain, like I still have tingling in my right hand because I have nerve damage, and I still get chronic migraines. I actually was struggling a little bit a couple days ago with a migraine. I didn't want to take the vaccine because I just didn't trust it yet, and I didn't trust.
Hmm.
I was the one that basically had side effects from literally every medication the doctors ever tried on me. I was
Yeah.
that person. So everyone who thinks they're invincible or it's not going to happen to them, I was not in that mindset. I was like, no, every single medication screws me up. So even if this is cool, I'm just going to wait because I'm that
Yeah.
person that's going to have the problem. So that was my mindset. It wasn't
Yeah, the
politically motivated.
one in a
Yeah.
million horrible side effect. You're like, that's gonna be me.
Yeah, exactly. Like I wasn't actually in the beginning of the rollouts of the vaccine. I didn't think it was bad. I thought it was a good thing. I thought it was great
Mhm.
actually, that it was happening. I thought that meant like, oh great, now people are gonna be able to live their normal lives.
Yeah.
I'm just gonna wait a little because of my situation. And then I caught COVID and recovered quite easily because I was actually pretty fit because I could run and walk still. I just can't
Yeah.
write. I can't write and do things at a desk well, but I could do things that require, there's my cat. I could do things that require like my can walk and run. So I was in good
Yeah.
shape. I was in good fitness. I also took that like pesky horse medicine, ivermectin, and I was okay. So right after that, I recovered from COVID. So I was like, well, there's no point now. And
Yeah.
so, and that's right when they rolled out the mandates
Mhm.
was was when they did that. So, and then my husband did get the vaccine and he had a terrible reaction. So I watched him have a rough time with it. And then we both got COVID at the same time. He was
Yeah.
the breakthrough case, right? At the time, we thought those were just breakthrough cases because, again, sort of still believing some of the lies, at least the half lies.
Mhm.
Um, anyway, the point is I couldn't continue working
Yeah.
and I was quite devastated. Honestly, it was a low time where I really felt like, God, I just been displaced again. After all
Yeah.
those years, I was so displaced. I mean, and then I finally got back to work, just something even like honestly, I was overqualified for, but I was just so grateful to be able to be going and just
Mhm.
making a little money and just being around human beings and doing what, using my brain.
Yeah.
No, it was gone. But that's when I was pretty down for a few months. And then after that, I realized, you know what this just did? This just emboldened me to speak the truth, right? That's where the
Mhm.
truthful therapist was born. Um, but while I was at that program, I was shocked. So basically, then in the teen program, there were about half the girls were identifying as trans
Right.
and none of the boys were at the time. I'm not sure what's going on now. So that was in 2021. And I was most shocked not at what the kids were doing, but how the other therapists were treating it or ignoring it really and enabling
Yeah.
it. And it was just so obvious that they were doing it to avoid other issues or to have a sense of power when they were feeling powerless or feeling lost, right? They
The
and
kids, you mean?
the kids were doing
The
that, right?
kids,
So
yeah.
the girls, they felt that, they didn't feel good about themselves, they didn't feel good about their lives. So being trans kind of gave them this little like power to be able to tell everyone they're a transphobe or not, avoid their issues because they could just say, well, you didn't say the right pronouns, so now you're in the
Yeah.
wrong. Instead of acknowledging like whatever the thing is that they need to address,
Well, and
issue.
also to be sort of love bombed and showered with affirmation and to be and treated as special, and
All of
there's
it.
all sorts of motivations, and it blows my mind that people are like, no one would choose to be trans for any reason. No one would choose this. Like I have I'm meeting up with an acquaintance of mine that I did a leadership program with a few years ago, and she's a teacher in Ontario, and she has been really vocal, like, with the stereotypical, just lambasting me as a hateful bigot, transphobe, homophobe for so many of the things that I've been sharing. And yeah, just saying stuff like that where it's like, no, she like literally just said that in a message to me like this morning that I responded to when I woke up, being like, no one would choose this. And it's like, there are several clear motivations for why people, especially kids, going through the awkwardness and the challenges of puberty, which every single human who's ever existed basically has had really deep challenges with, like, identity formation, the changing, like the like rapid massive changes going through your body, being like flooded with hormones, all the crazy social changes. That's when people start getting, feelings for, whether it be the same sex or opposite sex, it doesn't matter. It's like, this is a time of crazy changes in a child's life when they're trying to, like, this is part of why teenagers are such fucking pains in the ass, is they're like, they're going through all this stuff. They're trying to find themselves. They're rebelling against their parents and teachers, and they're really trying to, like, make their way in the world. And it's like, to suggest that there's no motivations other than them just quote unquote being and knowing who they are is just, it's so preposterous.
It's bizarre, right? To think
Yeah.
that, yeah, there's so many motivations that, and of course, the more vulnerable kids are gonna flock to it even more. I mean, lots of kids are, but I think that it is really gets to the vulnerable kids.
Well, because it's like, when especially for the most vulnerable, it's like when there's something that's being laid out to them on a platter that says, all of these troubles that you're having are explained by this, like, tightly sort of crafted narrative about, this is the explanation for all of your pain, all of your confusion, all of your feeling bad and scared, and like your depression, your anxiety. All of these super complex issues can be explained by this simple explanation. It means you're trans. It means you're born in the wrong body. And if you just adopt this identity, then everyone's going to praise you. Everyone's going to love you. You're going to be special. And it's going to solve all of these complex, confusing problems and deep challenges that are really just a part of what it means to be human, which is part of why it's such a travesty that people are, like, explaining to young kids at all, especially the most vulnerable, who are then going to obviously go, oh, I can explain away and solve all of these problems with just this simple explanation and this adoption of this identity, that then everything's going to be good. Everything's going to be solved. All my problems are going to go away. Everyone's going to love me. I'm going to, like, I've had a lot of mental health challenges in my life because of my upbringing. Like, I've been diagnosed with depression, generalized anxiety disorder, persistent substance abuse disorder. I've done a lot of therapy, individual and group therapy, and a lot of different meditation, leadership, personal, professional growth programs. So, like, I'm doing pretty good. But even recently, I went through sort of like a little program where I gave sort of access to these medical professionals and a psychiatrist to pull my whole medical records, to give sort of a second opinion on where I'm at, what I've done, and how I can move forward with some of the challenges. And they even gave me sort of like the new diagnosis, which is completely unsurprising, but of complex PTSD. And yeah, just when people are going through all of these really deep, challenging things, like, to give them this sort of easy to digest light at the end of the tunnel, that it's gonna fix everything. And, like, when we're dealing with these problems as humans, that has nothing to do with our identity, it has nothing to do with our sexuality or our gender. In most cases, I would say most people who've ever lived have had a whole host of these experiences. That's why when, I see some of the content, like my friend, this teacher friend of mine, sends me, that, like, tries to sort of explain that these experiences are unique to the trans community, so to speak. And I'm just like, this is, like, so silly. Almost any human could say this, like, so much of these things. and there's this feeling of like, when we have these challenges and we feel worthless and we feel like, you know, we're lacking love from our parents, or whatever, like the sort of origin of the issues are for these psychological challenges and mental health challenges, that like this adopting this identity is going to not only solve our issues, but then make us feel worthy of not feeling like this, and worthy of the opposite, of like feeling like we deserve to be seen and understood and loved. And yeah, so the idea that you can kind of chalk all of this like really deeply complex like stuff into this sort of simple thing that's kind of put on a platter for kids, and then say like the preposterous claim that kids who they do not know better at all, we as adults, the proponents of this as adults, should know better, but that they're, you know, that it's like it's just these kids truth and stuff,
Yeah.
and there aren't any of these
They know
motivations.
themselves. That's what they
Yeah.
say. They know themselves.
Yeah, when a kid, yeah, well, who
Yeah.
is that governor? I forget what state she's the governor of, but the one that was like, when kids tell us who they are, we need to believe them.
Yeah.
It's like,
I don't know which
oh
one said that,
my,
but
oh yeah. Anyway, but yeah, there obviously this stuff is like deeply, deeply complex, and so many of the proponents are just kind of chalking it up to this like simple explanation, right?
yeah. And then what it also does is it makes it, like you said, this easy button, but then it's a nice way to avoid the real pain that they're struggling
Mm.
with.
Mm-hmm.
So if someone has trauma in their history and it's really painful, or they're autistic and they don't fit in and they really struggled socially their whole life, instead of recognizing those things and addressing them, the trans becomes the focus, and becomes quite an obsession too. And
Yeah.
so that they actually, in a lot of ways, these kids who get really obsessed with the trans identity don't really develop properly, because they're just so entrenched in this trans identity. A lot of it's that victim mentality that they've been fed, which is like they're
Mm-hmm.
under attack and all of these other things. And so then they don't actually focus on what they need to focus on to develop into like productive adults.
Yeah,
um,
that's one of the like the saddest things, and sort of like the most infuriating things, is in so many things going on in our culture with the, you know, the proponents of the social justice and the critique of the entire patriarchal white supremacist system, heteronormative, that it's so sort of couched in these identities being inherently victims of all of these oppressive forces. And it's like, when people are dealing with these struggles, that's literally the last thing that they need, is to be treated like, or to view themselves as a victim, because then it's like you're training them to just be stuck in this belief, like set of beliefs and this mindset that are like the antithesis of what a human being needs in order to be able to overcome challenges and to
that's
be
it.
healthy. And it's like, fuck, like I can't believe this shit is going on. It's like makes me want to pull my hair out.
Right. And that's why I've been so outspoken, because that's exactly how I feel. It's like everything we know about increasing resilience, helping kids develop, helping kids learn how to be independent adults in their futures, we're completely unwinding all of that, or stunting them from becoming a productive adults. And I think that's what we're seeing today. I think that's why
Yeah.
there are so many people who are just throwing like perpetual temper tantrums and can't cope with everyday life stressors, and constantly say they're traumatized, or constantly say they're triggered and need a safe space, and constantly said this person hates them and that person hates them, or there's hate in the air. I mean, it's just this is what they've been trained to believe. And
Mm-hmm.
unfortunately, I do think it's by design. And the worst part of it is the therapists that I thought were the people that were supposed to kind of help people learn how to be resilient and learn how to cope with their lives are actually reinforcing that mentality, as opposed to helping people take responsibility with, of their own feelings and
Hmm.
learn how to deal with and cope with adversity. I mean, obviously people are victims of things. People go
For
through
sure.
things.
Yeah.
It's not about saying, discounting people's pain. It's just about learning how to be resilient and how to carry on and how to be a productive human so that you're not sort of stuck there.
Yeah, well, and that speaks to like a distinction that I've heard quite a number of times that's always like really stuck with me, is that it's like there obviously people have been victims of maybe like really bad bullying that could have been from like, kids they grew up with, but often like our first bullies are our parents in some ways, it's our siblings. There are systemic issues in our society that can lead to outcomes for people that can be seen as victims in some ways. And it's like, it's not to sort of like take away from that being the reality a bit, but the distinction is that like, it doesn't really matter what happened to you. It doesn't matter what your parents did, how they neglected you, how they abused you. It doesn't matter if you had really horrible things happen to you, because like it's the differences between blame and responsibility. Like, you're not to blame for what happened to you. You're not to blame for the struggles that you have. In many cases, it really is like people have had shit lives and really fucked up things happen to them. And yeah, like the blame should be placed on the abusers, and that can be an abusive system in certain ways as well. But you can't fix problems by just hurling blame everywhere, and especially at everyone but yourself, and taking no responsibility. So it's like you're not to blame, although in some cases we are actually to blame ourselves as well. Like, I read something even just earlier, I think, saying how like, you know you can only blame your parents, and in this case the systems of oppression in our society, to a certain point. It's like, as soon as you became old enough to make conscious decisions for yourself in your life, which really is kind of like starts to be something in the teenage years, then it's like you start directing your life. I made choices from being a teenager, and in some ways, like, using smoking weed and drinking with friends to cope with life stresses that turned into poor coping mechanisms later in life that I had to deal with. It's like, I can blame my parents, and I can blame what happened to me, and I can blame the education system and how it failed me as a rambunctious young boy, whatever. But I still have to take some of that blame for myself, some of that responsibility for the actions that have led me from where I was to where I am. And just, yeah, it's like, you can blame all you want, but if you're actually going to solve problems, if you're actually going to overcome the challenges that you're faced with, no matter what realm they are in, the only way to do that is to take responsibility that, like, no one is going to, even if they could, which they can't. So they're not going to, because they literally can't. But no one's coming to save you. No one's coming to fix your problems. No one's coming to heal your traumas. Like, the only person that is going to fix your life and your problems is you. And yeah, this victim mentality that is being pushed on kids and students in higher education, especially, is now we're seeing it ripple out into sort of these destructive forces in our society. And you said something, actually, I'd be interested for you to expand on a bit. Like, you said that you think that this is by design. Could you kind
Yeah.
of go into that a bit more? Because I think I would agree in probably a lot of ways, but what do you mean by that?
Well, I mean, unfortunately, I've gotten a little bit more of a dark mindset, but I used to be this naive little social worker,
Mm,
from NYU, like, oh, I'm here to help people and I'm a part of a group of people that helps people. And since then, I've learned a few things. I mean,
mm,
just through regular life. And then I've also just been kind of I guess you could call it red pilled. I just opened my eyes up to how certain policies that are promoted that are supposed to help people, I think really have hurt people. And maybe some
Mm,
of that was unintentional, and maybe in the beginning, I don't know. But in the end, we've seen the outcomes have been poor. For example, welfare, for the war on poverty. So that was in the 60s that they started this war on poverty, and to basically give public assistance to people who at the time, I guess, would need it, and mostly single mothers.
mm,
And what has that done? That has enabled them to mothers to have children without the fathers. It has broken down the family. It
mm,
has created more broken homes or single parent homes. And the number one outcome of disparities is not race, but it's actually whether there's two parents in the home.
yeah.
These are the things that I've now learned.
Blasphemy.
Blah!
Blasphemy.
Um, so the infamous man who I'm really getting that information from is Thomas Sowell, and
Love Thomas Sowell.
he's written a lot, and I've read some of his things, and he really opened up my eyes to how things that sound nice really aren't so nice, or don't help. And you've got to see the bigger picture. You've got to see the actual outcomes and not just go by what feels good.
Mm-hmm.
And so I just see a lot of this just destruction of the family, destruction of individual spirit, and people's ability to have resilience, the sexualizing of children through like media and through schools, just making just Planned Parenthood and what they're doing. I'm not even going to get into the abortion debate, but it's not even about that. It's just really about how it's just enabled people to have children without fathers, and for fathers or men to be less responsible.
Mm-hmm.
And it does create this chain reaction for children to end up in a less stable home. And I
Yeah.
think that it creates the cycle. So I
Well, it
think
incentivizes it, right? And
exactly.
that's something that like Michael Schellenberger talks about a lot in
Yeah.
like writing his book San Francisco, which is
Mm-hmm.
it's about just that, like same thing, different sort of like window into the same forces, where it's like progressives who are sort of driven by their feelings. It's like that I heard a quote a long time ago that's like really kind of apt to a lot of things that are going on, where it's like, if you're not a liberal when you're young, then you have
Yeah.
no heart. And if you're not a conservative when you're older, then you have no brain. And it's like liberals and progressives do sort of stereotypically, which I have been a liberal activist who like I volunteered and became a team lead on a campaign leading up to the 2015 Canadian federal election that was specifically to make sure that like the Harper conservative government, which was in power for like about 10 years, didn't get reelected. Like I like so many people, and like Michael Schellenberger talks about, like we come from the left, we understand these sort of like ways of thinking and motivations and mindset and perspectives, but where we see so much of kind of the failure of these policies and the issues that they're sort of creating is where people are driven by sort of this adherence to this ideology, or this sort of compassion and feelings based ideas about the way the world should be, and that like if only we enacted more compassionate policies, then it would solve these issues. But then the reality comes back, and the statistics and the data come back that don't support their beliefs or their perspectives or their policies. But as we know, like it's sort of like a psychological, maybe you can speak more deeply to this, but it's a psychological thing that humans do when their beliefs are challenged. They don't respond to facts and data and rational thinking. They dig their heels in and they tribalize, and they sort of like fight for the beliefs that they already have rather than actually taking in the new information and changing their beliefs, which in this case is like the actual results that we're able to see in the data for, you know, incentivizing single parent homes, which usually is the mother, because they get the, you know, funding from the program when the father's not in the home. So it incentivizes a whole bunch of different motivations on both the mother side and the father side to create these single mother homes. And in the case of Michael Schellenberger's Sicko, it's like the, you know, San Francisco progressive policies, which is happening all over, you know, progressive cities all over the States and Canada, similar in Toronto, is that there's these feelings driven, compassion driven policies and policy makers that think if only we were more loving and compassionate towards these people, then it would solve all the problems. And it really is, it stems from this naive human nature or like perspective about human nature that if only people were loved, then they would be good. And yeah, they would be great. And they couldn't possibly have any sort of negative or, you know, dark motivations. There's no dark side, there's no shadow side to human nature in these people's eyes. So it's like they can't see when the data actually shows that, well, no, when you give people all this stuff, they actually behave in ways that are not going to get the results that you think it will. It actually does the exact opposite. But then when when the data shows that, they sort of like double down. So it's like instead of the compassionate policies trying to get, you know, affordable housing and homes for the homeless and safe injection sites and
all
safe drugs and stuff like that. Right. It's like they think that if they give them all that, then they're going to, you know, put themselves into treatment and stop the addictive, you know, the cycle of addiction and homelessness, when it's like the reality could literally not be further from the truth of that, right? And so it's like we see that happening in so many ways.
That's another subject I actually want to get into on my commenting is substance abuse and how it's treated, especially with harm reduction ideology. I was going to post this. There's obviously a big push for harm reduction here in California, and now it's Narcan. How do you pronounce it?
Yeah, Narcan.
And they're saying, you know, we need to have our Narcan everywhere. And I mean, honestly, that does sound good. But Schellenberger actually just put out an article recently, like about 2 weeks ago, showing that even though Narcan is more accessible, it's not helping. There's actually been in San Francisco right now, we're on track to have more overdoses than we had in 2020, like record numbers. And it's because of the fentanyl crisis, and it's because they're not addressing the root problems, and they're not actually providing any kind of substance abuse treatment options. They're not providing any consequences for people. And you said you actually have a little bit of a history of substance abuse. I mean, I think anybody who has some kind of experience, either personally or with somebody they know, the way people change their behavior is there need to be some kind of consequences. And if there aren't any consequences, and they won't change, especially when there's a strong addiction happening. And so progressives really just I don't understand when it's gotten this extreme how they still can't see that, but for some reason they can't.
Well, it seems like a lot of, I think probably a lot of people that sort of think this way and get into these policy decision-making positions and things like that is like, a lot of them are Ivy League educated. A lot of them, you know, stereotypically are white, and and regardless of the race, it really doesn't matter, but it is sort of like funny that you see a lot of the, you know, there's this like stereotypical activist profile that it's like elite, well-off, highly educated white women that are sort of pushing this. And it's because they're driven by this sort of compassionate kind of urge that is like divorced from reality in a lot of ways. But it's like they don't have any real life experiences to understand the depth of like the challenges that are happening and the real reasons for it. And so their prescriptions are, again, like it's just completely divorced from reality, right? Like two of my mom's brothers out of my three uncles on her side of my family are homeless drug addicts and drunks. Like this shit is so fucking close to me and my family. And for that reason, I've been very kind of, I've had my own challenges, but I've been very kind of strict with myself in some ways to not allow myself to go down that road. So again, it's sort of like this conversation about consequences. It's like when people don't have consequences, they will, it's almost like people get, especially when they're really struggling with mental health issues. And from my experience, mental health issues and so many of the issues that we're sort of seeing are, it's based in our beliefs, it's based in our education, it's based in the things that we've been taught about ourselves in the world, that it's like that's what's underlying how we feel about ourselves, with like, the automatic negative thoughts and the beliefs that we have that underlie feeling sort of hopeless and worthless, and make people struggle with depression and anxiety, and all of that leads to substance abuse issues. Which also, just sort of an interesting caveat too that comes to mind, is that like so many different manifestations of like psychological issues that happen, it's actually the depression and the anxiety that is the real problem underlying those issues, whether it be trans identity issues or gender dysphoria, or things like other, what Jordan Peterson calls like psychogenic epidemics, that we have a history, like 300-year history of examples of mostly teenage girls being, or largely teenage girls being affected by these types of psychological issues that go through sort of waves with anorexia and bulimia. And it's like the gender dysphoria or the anorexia or the bulimia aren't the issues. Those are manifestations of the underlying
symptoms,
depression and anxiety and stuff like that, right? So it's like people just, I think people really have, the road to hell is paved with good intentions.
Yes,
it's like
that's it.
It's like they have,
yeah,
it's like they have like good motivations, I think, and intentions, but they're just completely unable, or in many cases unwilling, to acknowledge like the true depth and complexity and nuance of just how complicated these issues are. And so it makes sense that in all these different realms, whether it be trans issues or homelessness and drug addiction and mental health and welfare and issues that stem higher crime rates from like not having two-parent homes, which there's a whole bunch of data on. It's like it's so much easier to sort of paste a band-aid of a simple understanding of both the understanding of the issue and the sort of move towards like solutions that aren't gonna work, and that's like happening in all these different like realms, right?
Yeah, I think there's a combination of, I think there's a lot of people with the good intentions like you just described, and I think that's actually most therapists or most people in the mental health field, even probably people in education like teachers.
Oh yeah.
But then I think that there are people who are the evil ones that know what they're doing, that are driving this.
Yeah.
And they're motivated by money and power, and they're getting something from it to be able to manipulate those who are able to be manipulated. And that's the people who like are mostly my colleagues that believe this stuff is about kindness and about acceptance. And so I think there's like those two kinds of people, that those smaller number of people who are driving it, maybe like some politicians and people like George Soros and,
Well,
the
there's also like,
globalists.
like the statistic that I've seen that's just sort of like shocking, that it's almost like everyone needs to know this, who especially who is like supporting this, is that it's estimated that a person who's trans and medicalized by around their like late teens, early 20s is going to be a patient for life for the
Like,
medical and pharma industry, that's going to generate approximately between 1.5 to $2 million over the course of their lifetime. And that, like, there's always monetary incentives that make people do evil shit in
yes.
every single problem we've ever fucking seen in the entire history of like our species, and all of the corrupt politicians, all of the corrupt businesses, corporations, the CEOs that get these massive fucking bonuses. Like, there's always that incentive to follow the money and see what's going on with the monetary incentives to be pushing this one way or the other. It's like however much you believe in climate change and the ecological crisis, it's like,
Nope,
it,
I don't.
yeah, but I mean, like, I think, yeah, there's a whole conversation to be had about that, but
It's
there
about
is,
power, in my
right,
opinion.
yeah, that aspect is always present. That's the thing, right?
Hmm.
It's like we do know that we're surpassing some ecological limits for like the extraction, like the rate of extraction of certain resources, the ability for the planet to sort of replenish itself is something that we have to address. It
No, but
doesn't
all the
mean,
solutions don't help that. That's
right.
why I
Well,
know it's not about that. Yeah.
right. Well, and that's the thing. It's kind of like what we're talking about is happening in every major issue that we're faced with, is has these like similar attributes that are at play, where people try to give really simple explanations of what's happening with the problems, really simple band-aid solutions that aren't going to work, that actually exacerbate the problems. And
Yep.
then when you point out that the data shows that actually this is like causing generally like a lot more problems than it's like alleviating any of the issue, and then they, because of our human nature, they like ignore facts, data, logic, reason, dig their heels in because
Hmm.
they're acting from like this emotional and
Fear
tribalized,
based. Fear
yeah,
based.
getting stuck in fear. So it's really unfortunate that this is the case across the board with so many issues, because it's like, fuck, like,
Yeah.
we're like, what are we going to do about this? It's so fucking complicated. Like,
That's why I was like, I'm in a unique position because I'm a social worker
mhm,
with pretty much more conservative values at this point, which have shifted. As you can hear, I didn't used to see all these things before in the same
mhm,
light. So the fact that I come from the social work background, I have all this rich mental health experience. I've worked in the inner cities of New York, and I've worked with in all different populations here in California, and
yeah,
I've seen it on the ground, which is different than most people who have a voice in the conservative movement. They don't work in mental health because most of them don't value mental health, and they might have a reason for that, quite frankly. But
yeah,
regardless, I mean, I don't think it's all bad. I think, unfortunately, it's getting worse by the day. But I think that a lot of people benefit from mental health treatment, and there at least were programs that were helpful before they became so captured by a
yeah,
different ideology, by the victim mentality, by the critical race theory, by the queer theory, by these COVID mandates that were completely illogical and keeping
mhm,
people silenced and masked up, and having to make decisions against their own values. So, I mean, yeah, so that's why I'm in a unique position. That's why I decided to speak out, which was not my natural inclination. It kind of went against my grain because I'm not really one for public speaking or
yeah.
being public. I've never even used Twitter before last year in my entire life. So it's weird that I'm like on Twitter, like tweeting people that are, whoever,
Yeah.
names.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
then it's like, oh my God, or like, here I am quoted in this paper about this. It's funny, my husband has always been conservative and I wasn't. I was really politically neutral, not really involved in any of it. But he's always
Mhm.
followed a lot of these conservative medias like Town Hall and Breitbart. I had barely even heard of these things before, like a couple of
Yeah.
years ago, to be honest. I'm just being really clear. Like I was one of those ignorant people. I was never pushing things like progressives were, but I was really just like asleep.
Yeah.
Anyway, it's just funny that like I was just quoted in Town Hall for being in a documentary called Cut Daughters of the West by a
Yeah.
Canadian, Simon Esler.
Mhm.
And I was quoted in that and I was like, look, I'm in Town Hall. Don't you think it's funny that your former liberal social worker wife is now in town hall?
Yeah, yeah, for
It's
sure.
just a
Well,
funny thing.
you've
Um,
been doing a great job, and yeah, I haven't seen Cut yet, but I've seen, obviously, like, you were in Disconnected as
yeah,
well, and Affirmation Generation
I'm
was,
not in that one,
you're
but
not
yeah,
in
it's a
that
good
one, but
one.
like that
Yeah,
one was like really, really amazing, the way they've like laid out the different aspects of these issues in sort of
yeah.
these like different categories, and really go into it with everyone that's in the film. But why don't you speak a little bit to some of the, like you said, like your profession has been ideologically captured in many ways, and you have gone to some of these trainings recently. I also, every time you like keep saying California, I don't know if you've noticed, but I kind of like am holding a smirk back, because every time you say it, I'm like thinking like, oh, California, like you're in the belly of the
It's the
beast.
worst.
You're in the
Yes,
belly, the eye of the storm down there.
I am. And not only am I in California, I'm in Silicon Valley. That's where all the tech companies are. I'm 15
Yeah.
minutes south of San Francisco. I am in the belly of the beast.
Yeah.
Yes.
Wow. But yeah, speak a little bit to what's going on in your profession, what you see going on, some of the trainings that you've been attending recently,
Yeah.
and the new Substack article that you posted about that they're kind of scared that the narrative is breaking down. And also in relation to that, if you can maybe, you can or not explain that first, but also just some of the, it's like the narrative is, for whatever reason, in the US and Canada, that's what we're doing on the level of like politicians, people in power, people making policy, and massive institutions who are the governing bodies for medical professionals and things like that, are all sort of, despite that, the UK, Sweden,
Hmm. Hmm.
Finland, Netherlands, like these whole entire countries have evaluated the data, have seen that like the evidence that has been used to bring us to where we are, supporting the Dutch like the Dutch model, and the affirmative sort of protocols that have been put in place and even legislated, which is one of the terrifying things about places like California,
Yeah.
Canada, happening in Canada a lot, that it's like mandated that medical
Yes.
professionals only affirm, otherwise
Yes.
it's,
A conversion.
stupidly considered conversion therapy, which is absurd. But yeah, that it's like these entire countries have evaluated the data and seen that the studies that were used to support this model were really poorly made. They've been completely dissected, completely debunked. And that's why these countries, and also with the detransitioners and the
Hmm.
like the evidence for harm is actually really clear, and the evidence to support that this stuff is reversible or not harmful or beneficial is actually, it's either really poor or it's actually non-existent. and
Yes.
and yet here we are in Canada and the States, just completely ignoring reality. So
Yep.
yes, so yeah, speak to kind of what's going on in your profession, and let me know as well. We're kind of at the hour mark here, so
Okay.
we
Yeah.
can.
I'll talk a little more about the conference. So yeah, I was
Mhm.
at this, it was a CAMFT, which is California Association of Marriage and Family Therapists. It was on May 6th and May 5th and 6th, I believe, and 2023. So about a week and a half ago from when we're recording this. And it was in Santa Clara, California. So I went there because that's near where I live, and I realized that this was a national conference, and I wanted to see for myself, for my own eyes, what was going on. And I now have a little bit of a platform, and I can sort of go there and report what's
Mhm.
being said, so I can say it firsthand. Because, like I said earlier, I was on disability, and then I was working for only about 6-7 months, and then got taken out because of the vaccine mandate. I wasn't able to really see it. I'm just kind of seeing and hearing what's online or hearing what people are telling me. I wanted to
Yeah.
know firsthand.
Mhm.
So I went, and there were several classes that I took. Of course, I picked the wokiest of the woke classes. And two of them were there was one for, basically it was called the affirmative care model for adolescents. That one was the
Yeah.
worst one, and that's the one I just wrote about today, that I just
Right.
released. And it was run by a trans man, Aiden Olson Kennedy is his name, her name. And and then the wife, which is an MD, a doctor at Los Angeles Children's Hospital, her name is Joanna Olson Kennedy. And they were both just, I mean, they were such extreme radical leftists. I mean, the language they
Mhm.
were using, they were saying the Diagnostic Statistical Manual, the DSM, is colonized. We need
Oh, of
to,
course it is.
yeah,
Everything is.
um, it's dominated by white cis het privilege.
Of course.
Yeah. I mean, these are things you think like, oh, a blue-haired college student would say to you, but not like a professional doctor at a
Yeah, that's the
sanctioned
terrifying
training.
thing.
Yeah, and and they were just really contradicting themselves constantly. So one of the
Mhm.
criticisms was in the DSM, which the DSM honestly is problematic, but for other reasons. But they're criticizing the DSM because really the whole point of the DSM is it talks about disorders. As
Mhm.
we know, I don't know if you know this, gender dysphoria used to be called gender identity disorder. They changed
Right.
that about 10 years ago, really to destigmatize it. And
Mhm.
it seems like the end goal is to take away any sense of disorder or distress. So Aiden,
Didn't they remove it in the most recent DSM altogether?
it's now called gender dysphoria, so it's still there,
So they
but it was called
changed it.
gender
Right.
identity disorder, but
Okay.
previously. So
Okay.
now everyone's calling it gender dysphoria. That was in 2013, I believe, or 2014, one of those 2 years. It's
Right.
about 10 years ago now. So yeah, Aiden said that, one of the big problems with the DSM is it describes, it really is like a manual. They sort of try to use this medical model of psychological disorders, which people have criticisms of. And
Mhm.
that's a big debate, quite frankly. That's one of those up for discussion things. And it usually a way to measure someone's having a psychological disorder or a diagnosis of some sort is you look at what kind of distress they're having as a result of this problem. So
Mhm.
gender dysphoria is measured by levels of distress. Well, Aiden didn't like that. Aiden found that very stigmatizing and said, no, this is not about distress because this is just, you just are, right? Like, that's not distress. That's stigmatizing to say that's distressing. However, he spent like a lot of time in the training explaining to us how distressing it is to be trans. He even showed, I'm saying he just because it's easier, but he even showed a video showing like how, like, all the racing thoughts that someone who's trans might have, because are they worried they're going to pass people looking at them? They're nervous, they're worried about this or that or the other thing, and just how distressing it is. So it's like, on one hand, oh no, you can't think about it as distressing because you're born that way, or it's just an immutable characteristic, like having, I don't know, a hand or something. But
Well,
on the
they sort of liken it to sexual orientation, that
they're trying to,
it's
yeah, make trans like
it's
the new gay.
immutable. Yeah.
Yeah.
when really
And
it's
that's
the new
honestly up for debate
homophobia.
too. I mean, that's up for debate too in certain circumstances, especially when there's so many rainbows being pushed to be gay, or people who have trauma sometimes gravitate to being gay, especially women. So,
Oh,
I mean,
and
I just don't think it's cut and
the
dry
the
on any end.
widespread, yeah, and like the widespread access that this, first generation or two of humans have had to like an unlimited amount of free hardcore pornography
Porn,
online,
exactly.
like that's
It
something that like,
influences you. Yeah,
yeah, and like I'm good. It's something that I've dealt with, and I'm going to speak to more in future like episodes of my podcast. But yeah, like these issues are complex. They're multifactorial.
exactly.
They're not this immutable characteristic that people are born with that are utterly uninfluenced by anything else that
Right.
happens in a person's life. It's like,
Yeah.
imagine if they said that, like you said, like this isn't a dysfunction that you're feeling distress about. It's just who they are. It's like, imagine if like they said that about depression.
Hmm. Which
Like,
they're starting to also. I mean, I think it's
yeah,
becoming widespread. I
it's,
mean, let's affirm everything, not just
well,
gender, but we can
yeah.
affirm this and affirm that. And people making bad choices, oh, well, it's okay because you have this problem and that problem. And then therapists aren't being helpful anymore. So that, I mean, I think
Mhm.
that's actually happening on a wider scale.
It
The
is,
gender
yeah.
thing
Like
is easier to look at.
there's I forget what the guy's name is that was the guest, but on Barry Weiss's podcast, honestly, I listened to a really good conversation she had with somebody who he has, I don't know if he has like um multiple personality disorder, but he has like really severe mental health challenges that if he's not medicated for, and
Hmm.
like for so many people that experience those types of things, it took him like a really long time and really uh getting in trouble with the law and being in and out of psych wards and on a million different meds before sort of
Hmm.
finding one that works. It's like he's sort of like, he's okay when he's on like his medications that he's like found that work, and he's sort of like accepted that this is like a really profound mental health issue
Yeah.
that he has, that he is literally like a paranoid, like schizophrenic, psychotic, violent person that he's got in trouble for
Right.
if he's not medicated. And when, because he is medicated, he's like a really prolific sort of writer, and he's extremely intelligent and articulate about these issues, especially in relation to his own experiences. But a big part of that conversation is just kind of what you're saying, that there, this sort of, for lack of a better way to term it, like this progressive urge to treat humans as nothing, in a very naive way, as nothing but good. Like they don't
Yeah.
have a bad thought or bone in their body. If only it weren't for the oppressive forces victimizing them, then everything would be good. They would be all good. And there's no dark motivations. There's no shadow side to humanity. And that, like, they're affirming even like deep mental health issues like schizophrenia and psychosis and
Hmm.
true like multiple personality disorder. They're just simply affirming it not as a diagnosable dysfunction that's causing real problems for themselves and others, but that it's just another way of being in this lofty,
Right.
you know, like we just have to accept everyone and everything
It's all
for,
about normalizing, so that we went from destigmatizing. So,
right.
there was a time when if someone had a real mental illness like schizophrenia, I'm going to guess that man probably had schizophrenia, not multiple personality disorder, but I don't
Something,
know. I
yeah.
haven't heard him to know for sure.
I'll have to
Um,
look up who it
but
was. I'll share it with you after.
um, but what they've done is, there's people with real severe mental illness. Unfortunately, it's been watered down because so many people now claim they have a mental health disorder, and it's, that's from like somebody having a bad day or not being wanting to get up out of bed
Yeah,
that day to
yeah.
somebody like you
I felt
described
bad
this
today,
man.
so I'm clinically depressed.
Yeah,
No, you're
people.
not. fuck. Like,
And then on the internet, like especially young people are kind of wearing it like a badge of honor,
yeah.
and
Well,
it's a
because they're
way.
getting social
Yeah,
credit for it. Like
exactly,
they're getting an elevation in social status,
exactly.
and especially like with the, quote unquote intersectionality, where
Hmm.
you're part of more than, like, if you're part of more than one identity group that is a victim of an oppressive like culture or system,
Nah.
then it ups the clout, it ups the social, like your place in the social hierarchy, it ups even your ability to speak. Like if you don't have as many intersecting oppressive
Right.
victim like identities, then you don't get to speak, like
Right.
literally. That and
I don't
so
play that
there's,
game. I don't
it's like,
care.
yeah, it's like there's just all of these clear, which should be clear to a lot of people, all these forces at play, where of course young kids who don't know better are going to get like caught up in all of this, right?
Yeah,
And
so I
it's,
just can I stop you, because I just realized I never plugged in my computer and I'm getting a notification that
oh
it's
yeah, yeah,
gonna
yeah,
die.
don't die. Actually,
Hold
I
on.
could plug mine in as well.
Um, I hope it doesn't ruin it. I hope you can edit.
Oh, hey, this podcast is called Unapologetically Human for a reason. If
Wait,
I
I
actually,
forgot to plug it in. I'm sitting here the whole time like I didn't plug in my computer. And now
no, I love,
okay, it's plugged in.
I
Woo!
love to include the normal everyday humanity in this podcast. And even if I were like, a lot of times, even if I cut something out of the podcast, I put it at the end as like sort of like a blooper reel
Oh,
at
okay.
the end of the show. So yeah, no worries whatsoever.
But yeah, I know the social clout for being mentally ill, it's a problem. And I mean, it's a problem for two people. It's a problem for the people who are generally healthy and are lashing on to something to become something they're not, or even
Yeah.
maybe actually make themselves mentally ill in some ways. But then it's
Hmm.
really doing a disservice for people like, I think, that man you just described, people who have real organic mental health disorders, or severe trauma, severe things that really need to be addressed. I feel like they're getting lost in the shuffle. They're not able to receive
Yeah.
services because there's so many people that are saying they need help, or saying that they are claiming these labels. And I mean, not everyone has a label. Not everyone should have a label. And that's not what should make us interesting. And it's okay to, I guess, be boring if that's what it makes you, because I want to be interesting because I'm smart and I'm thriving. I don't want to be interesting because I'm having problems, or I'm having
Yeah.
fake glamorous problems. Really, a lot of
Yeah.
times it's like that,
And
like,
that's what's
oh,
happening.
I'm depressed, but really look how hot I am, like
Well,
that. You see
it's,
that a lot.
yeah, well, one of the things that like they talk about in this podcast with this guy is that like you're seeing young people, particularly young women, because
Yeah.
they're, for a variety of reasons, they're susceptible to these types of issues that end up being like this social contagion, where they're claiming that they have multiple personality
Yeah.
disorder,
This is
and
awful.
they're making up all of these different identities that are, like they're, oh, this is my protector. And it's unfortunate because there is actually like, I'm sure you're familiar with internal family systems.
Hmm.
Right, where it's like internal family systems is great as far as I'm concerned, but like so many things, it's like we go from having like a useful concept and a genuinely like sort of noble set of goals and intentions to destigmatize mental illness and destigmatize the judgment, and like we do as humans in so many ways, and we always have, and we're going to always continue to, is that we go overboard,
Yeah.
overcorrecting
The pendulum
into
is
the
swung
into the
too
yeah,
far.
into the other side. And it's only when it swings far enough into the other side that normal people, who, even if they see these insane things happening, people do not interrupt or alter their normal daily lives if things don't directly impact them. So it's only when things get bad
Yeah.
enough and clearly crazy enough, which is, I think we're largely in that space where we're either, the pendulum is either already swinging back or it's fucking gonna be soon, because
I think it is
it's,
swinging. It's
yeah,
trying to anyway.
because it's just, it's so crazy, and it's becoming actually like impacting more people's lives directly, or indirectly or directly, or they see that it's like, oh fuck, like this is going to impact me very soon. Like parents, for instance, especially in these states where they're extremely liberal with their policies, where literally, like in California, if you don't affirm your child's gender identity, then the school counselor can deem you an unfit parent,
Yep.
and the state can take your children away from you. Like that is fucking insane.
We're not
Like,
exactly there yet, but they are doing it. Has happened in certain cases. There is a bill I actually testified in Sacramento against. It's AB 665, and it hasn't passed yet, but it's on its way. And that is pretty much what you just described. So if right now a 12-year-old can consent to therapy without parents' consent, and which usually happens in the schools, but they can do it if some other way if they can pay for it. But in the schools, a lot of times they provide it for free, and that's how kids get indoctrinated. But they're going to extend it to residential treatment. So soon, if this bill passes, which it looks like it probably sadly will, even though I did testify against it, but I think there's a lot of forces that are going to keep it going. Funding and
well, the
whatnot.
wheels are in motion on all of this stuff in a lot of ways.
Yeah, they're going to extend it to residential. So basically a school counselor can decide this kid, usually it's going to be around trans, but it could be around anything. This kid needs to go to residential. The parents don't approve of it, or the parents are too busy, or I'm too lazy to call a parent. It could just be as simple as that. I know better. And I'm going to send this kid to a residential program. And then this kid is no longer under the care of the parents. So the kid could go to school that day and then just not come home, because a school counselor decided the kid needs to go to a residential program.
It's absolutely horrifying.
Yes, it's completely horrifying. So we who are against it are calling it state-sanctioned kidnapping.
Yeah.
That's what we're calling it. It's the state-sanctioned kidnapping bill in California. We're a trans sanctuary state. So basically, because other states are banning the trans medicine for people under 18, we're calling it medicine, but it's not really medicine.
We lost her. We'll see if she jumps back in. Maybe her computer died. Uh-oh. That's okay. Let's take a little breath. Shit is fucking intense. Let's see if I get a message from her on my phone on the gram. Hey, there she is. Hey.
Well, there you go. So there you really got the thing. So, okay. All right. So to be totally frank, so I plugged in the thing, but then I realized that
it wasn't plugged into the wall.
It wasn't actually plugged into the box. I can't show it.
Oh, yeah. No, I know.
I plugged in to the computer, the one end, and then
it's plugged into the outlet.
End, but the two weren't plugged together.
Yeah. That's so funny.
It wasn't put together. And I'm like, why did I just plug it in?
That's funny. Right when you disappeared, I was like, oh, I think her computer died. I bet there was it wasn't either wasn't plugged into the outlet, or the connection to the box. That's funny.
Now you really have some good outtakes.
See, this one, I was actually, while I was waiting for you to come back, I was just talking into the mic to myself. So that's something I'll pop at the end of the episode probably. But
I forgot what I was saying. But anyway, yeah. So
you're talking about the sanctuary state.
The sanctuary state. So yeah, California is a trans sanctuary state. A pretty prominent detransitioner, Chloe Cole, testified against it. Really retching stories, and yet they still looked at her in the eye and still passed this bill. And what it is basically kids from out of state can come to California and get, like, basically they can steal their parents' credit card and like fly to California and then go into the California foster care system and go get hormones and go get surgeries without the parents' permission, and really end up being trafficked or have other vulnerable things happen to them. It's awful.
Yeah. Yeah, well, and it's like how many states kids can just literally walk into Planned Parenthood and like
That's it.
literally that day, after like half an hour of speaking to somebody, walk out with a bottle full of testosterone or
Yep.
or estrogen or whatever they call the other one. But yeah, it's just it's quite mind-blowing. But anyway, we can sort of wind down here. I really, really have enjoyed speaking with you.
Yes.
Maybe we can, after you have your podcasting break, maybe we can have another
Sure.
chat at some point. Cause yeah, like I feel like I could talk to you for another hour and a half easily. There's so much depth to this, but I guess like one thing I'm curious about, and then you can maybe answer this, and then if there's anything else you want to share or anything else you want to speak to that maybe you haven't been able to on some of the other conversations you've been having, you can kind of wrap up with that. But I see, you know, it's kind of like we obviously connect with a lot of similar kind of ideas, and you could say that, you know, we're having this conversation and we're kind of shitting on the other side, so to speak, and in some ways it's, I think, well deserved, because things are so fucking crazy, and in other ways I feel like that's the kind of thing that if, you know, if anybody who was on the fence or a advocate for this stuff, they would sort of see that as reason to kind of dig their heels in on their side and whatnot. And something that I really like, because so much of the cultural conversation is, it's people not listening to each other.
Mhm.
They are not actually seeking to understand the other side, so to speak. They're just kind of, you know, they're tribalized. They're in a, you know, they people feel like they're in a war and a battle against the other side. They're dehumanizing each other. They're, again, not listening, seeking to understand. They're just, they're straw manning the other side. They're, you know, making these gross mischaracterizations of the actual issues that, and both sides are doing this, right?
Yeah.
Like, you know, whether they are, you know, progressive liberal activists or they're far right conservatives, it's like both sides ultimately have genuine things that they care about and concerns that are valid, I would say. And this is the case with just human beings, and pretty much every issue that we have is that, especially the people that are the most ideological, the most entrenched in their sort of side, their camp, their beliefs, they're the ones who are the most vocal. But it's like there's valid concerns on both sides, but rather than actually listening to what those concerns, or trying to understand what those concerns actually are, they're just kind of, they're mischaracterizing, they're strawmanning, they're making the other side's arguments ridiculous and easy to destroy, and they're dunking on each other. And because that's, you know, again, like this idea that humans are just all good and there's no sort of dark side to our nature. It's like, no, like we do that because we're egotistical. We fight to be right.
People want to win.
People want to win. And it's ultimately, in a sort of like a slightly sick and twisted way, it's fun to argue and fight and win and be right and dunk on each other. And that all is at play, and that seems to be the bulk of the the conversations that we're hearing. And something, so rather than sort of straw manning, one of the things that I love to see from people are when they give like a genuine good faith take to strong man rather than straw man the other side's position,
Yeah.
to sort of like speak to like what are the like, and so the question is like, if you're able to do that, speak to kind of like strong manning the other side's position and concerns, and what it is that you think that they're fighting for, that the, you know, conservative side is sort of like not understanding or straw manning, basically.
Well, I think, well, there's a few impasses. I mean, some of it has to do with worldview and belief
Mhm.
systems. I think one of the big impasses is religion.
Mhm.
So I think a lot of times when someone more on the right uses a political argument, but uses religion for their political argument, I think they lose a lot of the audience that might not have the same faith or belief system. And that's hard when you're trying to talk about like logical policies or things like that, and you start talking about religion and faith. And not to downplay religion and faith, I actually really respect it. But when you're
Yeah.
talking to an audience that doesn't have that religion or faith, then you end up losing that audience. So I think that's one of the reasons people really get lost. And then I think because the media and culture has polarized us so much, people do kind of have these, I don't know, triggers, these things. If you say a certain thing, someone just kind of tunes out or stops listening, even if everything else that the person said made a lot of sense. So I think that's one of the reasons people miss each other in terms of we have to be so careful in our language, because there are so many times if you say God, for example, then someone's just like, I'm out. I'm
Yeah.
not listening anymore. I
It
see
just
that. Yeah.
turns them off entirely.
And it's like, I'm actually personally not even that religious, but I was in that film Disconnected, which has quite a religious component. And I still think that film is very effective. And I think you can watch that film and not have a strong religious belief and get a lot out of it. But if someone
Mhm.
is just too turned off by it for whatever reason, and I think it really has to do with how we've been polarized in this way, then they're not going to hear any of the message, which is really quite a shame.
Yeah,
So,
well, and
yeah,
that's another one of the incentives too, that it's like the media is driving the polarization as well, because the the financial model and the incentives are really quite twisted. Like, the if it bleeds it leads, and
yeah,
the most vocal on both sides that outrage the other side the most get the most engagement. It's like the more angry and afraid you can make people, the more they engage. And the
yeah,
algorithms also have basically not even been programmed to do that, but by the nature of our responses to the materials that we're seeing, it's feeding people more and more
people want
outrage
clicks,
porn.
right? Yeah.
Yeah, it's like, and I've heard it called like outrage porn, right? And it's like,
Hmm.
and the media
And
companies
that's on
and
both sides. Yeah.
yeah, yeah, oh yeah, it's like
I
pushing
got,
people further and further into their
I
like
think like,
silos.
for example, and I'm not even downplaying the outrage, but I think people get so wrapped up in feeling outraged, for example, about the drag queen shows, which I
Hmm.
agree actually are terrible for kids. I don't disagree, but then you get just stuck in that feeling of outrage, and then you're immobilized, and then you're just mad instead of actually looking towards solutions and having conversations. You just get stuck in that state of anger, and then that's not productive anymore. So I guess
Yeah.
when I try to communicate online, I think about what I'm saying to be productive, to bring awareness to things, and to like shed light on things that would bring outrage, but also always bring hope too at the same time, or bring some kind of empowerment or a solution or a resource or something, so that like
Hmm.
that's I am intentional with that. I try. But yeah, I'm not going to get the same clicks as other people who are just going to like
No,
put out
no,
like,
there's no powerful emotions getting sort of triggered by the people who try to explain things with complexity and
yeah.
nuance, right?
And it's like a lot of what I have to say is it takes one to know one. I think that's why maybe I have this powerful message, because I am a therapist. I am a bleeding heart still. I mean, I'm not a bleeding heart liberal anymore, but I still am the bleeding heart, which can get in my way, quite frankly.
Yeah.
So I know what that's like. I know what it's like to just get so overwhelmed by emotion, to want to fix and change it, where it actually, gets in my way. And so I know how people think in a lot of ways. I mean, I obviously can't know how everyone thinks, but I
Of course,
think I just have some insight on how both sides are. And so that's how I try to reach different people that way. But I think it's unfortunate. There is a lot of censorship, and let's just face it, there is more censorship of conservative voices. And I think if there was less censorship of conservative voices, there would be less of a divide. So I am going to just put that out there.
Yeah, well, that's like back to Michael Schellenberger, what he's been sharing about the Twitter files and what he's deemed
the Twitter files,
censorship industrial complex, and that, it's like we just passed a law in Canada, Bill C-11, to regulate the internet and
that's scary stuff.
Force Canadian content. And he pointed out how like there's bills like this that are going through all over the Western world, and that they're like, tech and media companies have been shown and proven to be in collusion with governments and the intelligence agencies in all of these Western democracies to stifle dissent. And a lot of that is conservative voices, but
it's not even conservative, though.
It's just anyone who
disagrees. The trans thing was not a conservative thing. I mean, things I'm saying on the trans issue and a few other things too were not conservative or liberal or left versus right. They were just common sense, because
I
mean, and I'm in the Bay Area, as you know, of California, and so I'm around most people who vote Democrat, more left leaning, and a lot of them agree with me. They're just afraid to say it because they're afraid of being ostracized by their peers in their communities. But this is not a left leaning issue. It's just the people who are conservative are been more outspoken about it because they're not as afraid, and sort of their brand is like, we're used to being called names, whereas the people on the left they're not used to that. So it's just we've just been divided so hard from all these systems, and I think that is really the shame. And so the hope is that people can see past that, and unfortunately some people can't. But I really try to approach people in a way that's like not hateful, and not just like angry or saying like you're stupid or something like that. When I went to that conference, maybe we can end on this. When I went to that conference, I was at those classes, and lots of the content in there was completely radical and wild. And they said puberty blockers were reversible and they're fine, and the kids know themselves starting at age 3. And they said that we should call CPS if parents don't affirm. I mean, these are some of the radical things that I was taught. When I left the classes and just having one-on-one conversations, I thought I had to be a little more like on the DL, right? But every one-on-one conversation I had with literally anyone in the conference, just randomly, if I talked about what I learned or what was going on, they were shocked. They didn't agree with it. These were not conservatives that were agreeing with me.
Oh yeah, of course not.
They just aren't aware. They kind of make up in their head like, oh well, yeah, these are therapists that are figuring it out, or there's nuance. Like they still believe that because that's how it was even just like 5 years ago. So so a lot of this is being positioned as left versus right or whatever, and I think on the top maybe the left is pushing it, but in terms of the people, I don't see it that way. So I try to approach people just like through common sense, and I mean, facts, but I don't want to like sit there and give them charts and graphs and numbers because that doesn't work either. So
but just
like basic ideas.
Yeah, well, and what you're speaking to is like there are, polls coming out where people are asked about a lot of these questions, and the silent majority, the vast majority of people who are not politically radicalized on either the left or the right, the voices and the narrative that we're hearing in the media do not reflect normal people. They do not reflect reality. And it's kind of in the realm of, as we've always known, the you know, the rich and the powerful stay that way by dividing and
Yeah,
conquering.
we're like being
And
manipulated
yeah,
like marionettes. Yeah, it's just
yeah, and
so
it's not, none of these issues that we've touched on today are left or right issues,
no.
and viewing them in that way is, you know, we do so to our own detriment, because we're we're all human. The vast majority of us really all want the same things. It's like we want to be able to just live our lives, to try to, you know, live with dignity, with some level of prosperity, not live in poverty. We want to, you know, we want to live in peaceful and just societies where we don't have overbearing, bureaucratic,
Mhm.
authoritarian government overreach. And yeah, it's really through, you know, having conversations like you're having, like we're having, and like taking the the perspective and the sort of that middle road, sort of, where we actually can connect with one another and connect with people instead of fighting with them about all this
Yeah,
stuff.
and
And
recognize that the other side, if you want to put it that way, or people you're talking to that have a different point of view, they they actually care about people too. Like, I think the biggest
mhm.
misconceptions, especially about conservatives, is like you're cold and you're hard and you think people should just like, pull up their boots by the bootstrap, whatever that expression goes. I just messed it all up.
I don't know, I think that's actually how it goes.
Is that how it goes?
I think
Um,
so, like, yeah.
like I had somebody interview a while back ask me like, how can you have conservative views and be a therapist simultaneously? And I was like,
Yeah,
actually, I think it makes me a better therapist because I realize that's empowering for people, and I'm not wallowing in victim mentality, and I'm not telling them that they can't do things, and I believe in people, and that actually makes people stronger, and that actually makes them, it helps them therapeutically. So
yeah.
I mean, conservatives honestly are very caring, and traditionally conservatives give more money to charity. Conservatives are, they're
It's
more
because they
caring.
tend to have more, because they run businesses.
No, actually, well, in the United States, that's not true. Here in the United States, it's the people who have money are actually more Democrat because they're the ones that go to college, so they get indoctrinated in college. So in the United States, that's
Right.
actually not true. It's more the working class. So and I'm talking about just if you do the ratio of income versus giving.
Right,
So
right, right.
you're
I've
not
actually
just
heard that.
that's
I've
so
experienced that myself as well. Because even like I'm working for my day job. I'm working for like organic grocery company that works with local farms and stuff like
yeah.
that. And I get the most tips from sort of the most very normal
There you go.
looking neighborhoods, and from the super mansions that I go to,
Interesting.
nothing.
Yeah, there
And
you
I've
go.
heard that as well.
They are more generous because they don't believe the government. It's just that the difference is they don't believe the government should be doing these programs. They believe that it should be done through private entities. They
Mhm.
believe, and so just it doesn't mean they don't care. They're not giving. They just don't think they just know. Just put it this way, that the government screws it up. And if you do it through the government, then you've got bureaucracy, then you've got overhead, then you've got, bureaucrats running it. And then it doesn't actually get done the way it's supposed to get done.
Yeah,
So they believe like conservatives actually give more to charity, and they actually build private, agencies to help. So it's like,
yeah.
so that's the branding that's kind of lost. And I think like I mean, even my own family, that they are liberals, and they think that if you're a conservative, that means you're not as giving of a person because
Mhm.
you don't care as much about the homeless or something, right? Because you're mean because you want them to get off the street, instead of realizing, no, well, this is what we know will actually help in the long run. So
Yeah.
it's just recognizing what we believe is helpful, and
Mhm.
also recognizing we don't trust the government. That's the part.
Yeah, it's just, and just recognizing there's so many misconceptions out there,
Yeah.
and it's really only through, you know, having more conversations, especially with people that are, consider themselves to be on opposing sides of an issue, that's how we find, the common ground and the,
Yeah.
common humanity and whatnot. But on that note, thank you so much. We've gone
Thank you.
quite a bit over time here. I
Yeah.
really, really appreciate you coming on to chat with me. I really appreciate the work that you're doing, and I'm looking forward to continuing to follow you. And do you want to just let the folks at home know where they can find you online on your website and your socials
Yeah.
and stuff?
So I actually wrote a parent's guide to mental health, which helps parents find non-indoctrinating therapy, and I provide consultations for parents. I don't have like a list where I can just give you a name, but what I do is I consult with you and talk to you about what's appropriate therapy if your child's seeing a therapist, and help you tease out whether or not that's appropriate or, just non-indoctrinating in some way. And that is the truthfultherapist.org. And there I actually have online classes with information and the consultations. I have a Substack, which I've just written 2 big articles that expose what happened at the therapy conference here in California. And that is Pam, the Truthful Therapist at Substack.com, I believe is how that website goes. But Pam, the Truthful Therapist.
It is, yeah.
And I have an Instagram, which is I think where you see me, which is at the .truthfultherapist. And I have a Twitter, which I just changed the name to Truth Therapist, I believe is what it is now, Truth Therapist, so that people could Google me. Or you can just look up my name, which is Pamela Garfield.
I'll include everything. Everything will be in the show notes.
Yeah. So those are the places to find me. And yeah, you can just sort of search me. I'm on a lot of podcasts besides this one. I've been in a few articles. I've been in a couple of documentaries. There's a new one coming out via the Epic Times. It's coming out next month, which the preview looks really good, but it's not public yet, but I'm excited for it. So I've been in Disconnected, which is spelled with a Y, which is disconnectedmovie.com. And I'm in Cut Daughters of the West. And I'm not even sure the name of the Epic Times one coming out. So those are some places to find me.
Cool. Well, yeah, I appreciate you. Appreciate the all the resources that you share. I'll have links to all of this stuff in the show notes. And yeah, just thank you. I really, really appreciate you coming on and having a chat with me today. And also, I forgot to mention ask at the beginning, just what's the proper pronunciation of your name?
So it's Pamela Garfield-Jaeger.
Jaeger, okay.
So cool. Garfield like the cat and Jaeger like Jägermeister.
Yeah, I think I heard somebody on like a podcast call it like Jagger, and I was
Jagger.
I thought it should be Jaeger. Yeah, no.
That was Project Veritas that did that. Oh. I was like, I know my husband's like, because it's his name.
You're like,
he's like
James. Damn it, James.
Well, it's not even James because he left. They had a whole.
Right. Yeah.
It's the other guys, but yeah, they forgot to ask me, and they pronounced it Jaeger. But I'm not going to have a big hang up about it. But it's a shame because that's like the one like sort of big exposure one that I have.
Yeah. Well. Oh wow. Okay. Well, I hope you have a great day. I hope I hope you have a really good break, a well-deserved break from kind of a little bit of overexposure to media.
Yeah, that's what happens.
But yeah, no, keep doing what you're doing. It's really, you have a really important voice, and yeah.
I appreciate it. Thank you. Thanks for helping me have a voice. Appreciate that.
Yeah, no problem. All right. Well, I'm sure we'll have a chat again sometime.
Yes. All right. Have a good day.
Yeah, you too. Bye-bye.
Most people don't like working with the kids because some people might say they're a pain in the ass.
Some people, probably a lot of people. This is a time of crazy changes in a child's life when they're trying to, like, this is part of why teenagers are such fucking pains in the ass, is they're like, they're going through all this stuff. They're trying to find themselves. They're rebelling against their parents and teachers, and they're really trying to, like, make their way in the world. And it's like, to suggest that there's no motivations other than them just quote unquote being and knowing who they are is just, it's so preposterous.
It's bizarre, right? To
Yeah.
think that. Yeah.
If you're not a liberal when you're young, then you have no heart. And if you're not a conservative when you're older, then you have no brain. It's like, you can blame all you want, but if you're actually going to solve problems, if you're actually going to overcome the challenges that you're faced with, no matter what realm they are in, the only way to do that is to take responsibility that, like, no one is going to, even if they could, which they can't. So they're not going to, because they literally can't, but no one's coming to save you. No one's coming to fix your problems. No one's coming to heal your traumas. Like, the only person that is going to fix your life and your problems is you.